let's take our first steps with Copilot. I've opened the AI demo library here. And mind the IDE, I have 0 files open. That's quite important. Let's open one, the person class. This, by the way, is the archetypical AI example. You may have seen likewise examples before, but I did want to show it because it allows me to explain a few things. So the class is open, and in the code editor window, a suggestion pops up, grayed out. A full name property is suggested. This is AI at work. It inspects this class, figured out that full name is probably something that is common in a person class, and that it often consists of first name and last name properties concatenated. By pressing Tab, I can accept this suggestion. And immediately another suggestion pops up. Copilot thinks that email is also a common property to have on a person class. And I can actually scroll through these suggestions with Alt dot and Alt comma. Important here, if you don't immediately see these code completions, have a look at the settings here. If this is the first time you are using Copilot, and it is the first time you've opened the C# file inside of your solution, it may be that the option to enable completions for C# is not enabled. That's not something you will find on the options screen, because Copilot figures out what code is contained within a solution by looking at the files you open. C#, JavaScript, XAML, and so on, Copilot can make suggestions for it, but it's only after you've opened one of those files for the first time that it will allow you to choose whether or not you want suggestions for a certain language, and that is dependent on the solution you're working with. So that means that you can ask Copilot to enable suggestions for one language, but not for another one. But you do have to know where to find it, and this is where. Now, interacting with Copilot like this is okay, but it's not exactly the most user-friendly way, let's say. We are not giving additional input like this. All Copilot has to go by is the person class here. Through comments, this can be improved. Say we want to generate a constructor. Let me add a comment. Generate a constructor for all parameters. As you can see, Copilot actually starts suggesting completions for my comment, which is then again fed into Copilot as a prompt. And if I scroll through the suggestions here, one of the suggestions that pops up is indeed the constructor I asked for. Note that it's also smart enough to not include the full name property, as it noted that that is a concatenation of a first name and a last name, and that is typically not something you want in a constructor. You only want to accept the parameters you can actually set in this case. Others don't make sense for our person class. So let's accept this constructor. Alright, let me save this, close this class, and open the order class. There's nothing in this class here yet. But if we press enter and or wait a bit, we see suggestions that start to pop up. ID, for example. Name is something Copilot would suggest in an order class. That may also make sense indeed. Description may also make sense. And so on. So we eventually end up with an order class. But the only context that seems to be taken into account here is this class. Let me remove what we have here, save it, and open the order line class. This class already contains a few properties that make sense for an order line class, like an ID, a description, the amount of things you ordered, and the price. Now let's switch back to the order class here, and let's see what suggestions Copilot comes up with this time. We again get an ID, and the next suggestion we get is a list of order lines. Well, that's interesting. It seems that Copilot takes the files that are open in our IDE into account. Let's accept that. By the way, small intermezzo, making an AI course is quite an experience. Each author or content creator has their own way of working. Some can just wing it. Other people have to prepare and script everything. Other people write down a few key lines, key sentences, something like that. Everyone has their own process. Now, as you probably notice, I'm not a native English speaker. So what I tend to do is note down a few key sentences. So if you see my head going like this during a course, that's me reading those few key sentences or getting some inspiration from those key sentences. If you're a non-native English speaker, that really helps with avoiding having to re-record too much or simply avoiding too much rambling. The thing with an AI course is, I don't know in advance what Copilot is going to come up with, so I cannot script or prepare this in the way that I'm used to. I've got to say, it's a very interesting, exciting thing to do. Anyway, so far for that intermezzo. Let's continue. Next example. Let me open the accounting service class here. We again see suggestions here. Interesting, by the way, the suggestion we get is a calculate total for orders. So here too, Copilot seems to interpret the accounting service. It's thinking, okay, accounting, that will probably mean calculation, and seeing I have order and order line still open in my IDE, it knows to look at the order lines property and the amount and price from each order line instance. Let me close those two. I still want to calculate the total price of all the order lines in an order here, but I'm not going to do that with comments as before, because there's another option to interact with Copilot, and that is through the Ask Copilot window. You can open that by pressing Alt /. If you press / again, we see that a few commands are suggested. We can ask Copilot for documentation. We can ask it to explain code. We can ask it to optimize code, to generate tests even, and so on. We will look into a few of these throughout the course. For now, let me put my cursor on top here above accounting service, open it again, and ask it for some documentation. And there we go. Copilot tried to document an empty accounting service class, and it came up with a summary, provides accounting services. That does make sense for an empty accounting service class. So let me accept this. But let's take this a step further. What I actually want to do is calculate the total order price. If you look at what Copilot comes up with now, it does seem to think that a calculate total of something makes sense in the accounting service method, but it comes up with calculate total cost of items. That's because we no longer have the order and order line classes opened. It doesn't know about those anymore. It can't take them into account. So it comes up with the next best thing, a total amount of items apparently. We could now open those again, but via Ask Copilot, we can also reference files. So let's do that. You reference a file with hashtag. Then I reference order. I'm simply going to add a reference to the file now and send it. What we get now is an explanation of the order class, which is contained within the order.cs file. And it's actually completely correct. It took that file. It doesn't just come up with a random order class. It took the exact file I referenced and then explains it. It explains the properties. It explains an ID. It explains the order lines property. So that's already pretty good. But I still don't have my method yet. So let me ask Copilot to calculate the total price for all order lines in all orders. And I'm going to refer to the order.cs class. And when I press enter, Copilot generates a method for me. This time it looked at orders. It figured out that it contained an order lines property, and for those it took the amount and the price, multiplied them and added them to the total price variable. If I now press preview, we see it in line, and I now can press accept, and the suggestion has been accepted. Now, in case this isn't completely what you want, you can also make the suggestion better by referencing multiple files. I've done this a few times before, and I noticed that Copilot isn't always smart enough to know that on order line it should take the amount and the price into account. If that is the case, simply reference both files to make the suggestion better. And while I'm at it, Let me ask for some documentation. And there we go. We just looked at our accepted code and it added the necessary comments. Let's accept it. That's already pretty good. But there's another way to interact with Copilot, and that is via Copilot Chat. You can find that via the GitHub Copilot button on top here, and you can then choose to open a chat window. The first thing you see here is that a new thread is started. You can look at such a thread as a combination of what you asked Copilot and what Copilot responded. In other words, you can look at it as a chat with Copilot. Interesting here is that as long as you remain in the same thread, the full thread is taken into account as context for Copilot. So you can just naturally start conversating with it. And if needed, later on return to a previously saved thread by opening the thread drop-down and selecting it again. The window below here in which you can ask Copilot something has the same commands and its availability than the inline Ask Copilot window. So we can ask for documentation, for explanation, and so on. With the hashtag symbol, you can refer to files from here as well. We still have our account service class open here with the calculate total price method in it. Let me try explain calculate total price. And Copilot provides us with an explanation of a calculate total price method, including a code sample, but it's not related to our accounting service. This is a generic explanation of how a calculate total price method may look in some sort of code base. Apparently it has something to do with a shopping cart in this case. Now, what is written here does make sense. It starts with initialization, so setting the total price variable to null, then iterating in this case through products in a product list, for each product multiplying the price by its quantity, adding the amount to the total price variable, and eventually returning it. That is actually exactly what is in our calculate total price method. So this information can help by inspiring you on how to write something like that. However, we did not want to write something. We wanted Copilot to explain what was already written.